thank you for stopping by. On August 10th, 2023, the day that a lot of us have been waiting for had finally come when Spider-Man Lotus premiered on YouTube. I was in the premiere. In fact, I rotated between three different devices because I didn't want to miss a single minute of it. I played on my computer, casted it to my TV, and went mobile without my phone. Nothing was stopping me from staying locked in. And I'm glad that was the case because as I was watching it, I was able to collect a bunch of notes that saved me time for when I rewatched it to take my final batch of notes. And that's what I'm here to share with you today as we review Spider-Man Lotus according to the notes I took. Let's just get straight into it. Obviously, there are going to be spoilers ahead for Spider-Man Lotus, so if you haven't seen the movie, please feel free to go ahead and watch it and then come back because it is free. It's here on YouTube. I'll include a link in the description. The movie starts out by giving us a taste of three important things: New York, New York's greatest hero, and New York's greatest hero in action, paired up against a moderately street level villain and a few of his crooks. From there, they ease us into where Peter's head is at following that encounter and the story that we'll be following, the death of Gwen Stacy and the aftermath of it. They stick to traditions by giving us a title sequence filled with illustrations. When we're introduced to the main three characters, Peter, Harry, and MJ, we aren't just introduced to who they are now in this difficult time, but also who they are at heart. As we're being walked through their current life challenge, we're also shown the default stages of these characters through flashbacks and references, reminding us who they are in the headspace we know the best in, which is just as important for Harry and MJ as it is for Peter. What is it like to be Peter Parker as a consequence of being Spider-Man? That's the angle I feel like this movie gives us. Even better, instead of being too much about Spider-Man and whoever the enemy is, they also don't give us too much Peter Parker and too little Spider-Man. They give us just enough Spider-Man sequences as well. From fight scenes, flashbacks, dreams, nightmares, and even just scenes where he puts on the suit to get out into the city to further process what both Spider-Man and Peter Parker are going through. Circling back to how it's not too much of one character or one side of a single individual, one big thing I want to highlight is that the film uses the appropriate amount of its time to flesh out the other characters, which adds to the significance of those characters and how much depth they add to Peter's life, both as a normal guy and as a hero. As stated by the creator, Gavin J. Conop, I hope I didn't butcher that name. This movie was more of a film about Peter Parker and therefore more of a drama than an action film. So when I made it to the end, I wasn't left wanting more Spider-Man, more build up for future villains, or more action in general. In fact, I got all the character development I wanted. The final scene where Harry and MJ come together with Peter to tie all their stories as it relates to their origin as friends, what they're experiencing now throughout the movie, and how they've grown together in all the time since then, as they continue to do so now, was perfect. Speaking of perfect scenes, there's one where attention is drawn to a drawing on the wall in Tim's bedroom. For those who don't know or remember, Tim is the terminally ill young Spider-Man fan who Spidey visits. He's got a huge collection of Daily Bugle papers, toys, merchandise, drawings, and there's even an old Spider-Man cartoon playing on the TV when his hero gets there. The framed photo on the wall was an old Spider-Man homework assignment where he had to draw a hero. He drew Spider-Man, but he drew Spider-Man without his mask, despite not knowing what he looked like yet. Tim drew a face that looked a lot like his own, but ironically enough, the face also looked like a nerdy Peter. I feel like it symbolizes the significance of a suit that covers the face and body, and how it allows everyone to be able to see themselves within the hero with no wrong answers. Another thing that I didn't quite notice until I rewatched was that, in a way, the title sequence of illustrations serves as a placeholder for the event in question, or a general premise of a sort for what we don't see on screen. In the Raimi movies, they would retell the events of the previous films in illustration. In this case, rather than seeing random comic style art, which is what I originally thought it was, we're actually being told the story that puts us where the film begins. And the reason why I like that enough to point it out is that it's another great way to compensate. Because even though there was enough Spider Man for me, I know a lot of people are still going to see the lack of Spider Man for a Spider Man film as a shortcoming without taking into consideration that it's a fan film and that they can only go so far with it. So I rewatched the film, noticing that the title sequence was actually part of the story, which made the movie much more enjoyable in that moment. And frankly, that's much better than a recap or just random images. Since we're on the topic of set events, something that I meant to take note of during my initial watch that I was reminded to note down when rewatching was expanding for myself on what happened with the Green Goblin during his death scene. The final brawl shows Spider Man basically pounding his face in. Just think of the No Way Home scene. They mirror each other pretty closely, but by the way it's conveyed, it feels like they were supposed to be the killing blows. So I'm guessing the difference between this scene and the one in No Way Home is that in Lotus, he wasn't pulling his punches at all, using all the strength he needed to kill Goblin. However, the illustrations shown earlier suggest that he died by his glider, and the news reporter says the same thing, that blade wounds were found in Norman's body. So, was the glider death something that happened off screen, or was there a puncture in between fight scenes? Goblin tapping out and saying that he'll see Spidey in hell made it pretty clear to me that that was the end of the fight and the end of Goblin. So I'm guessing the illustration that shows him dying by the glider was merely part of a loose idea of what happened, and that in actuality, the glider's blades may have been used on Goblin at some point during the fight, just that it wasn't the killing blow. I don't remember the reporter saying that it was the cause of death. That's just my way of explaining it based on what I watched and noticed. If I got something wrong, feel free to let me know in the comments. Now, let's talk about the soundtrack. The soundtrack matches the tone, energy, and climaxes of the overall film. It's not too little, like some might expect for a fan film, or over the top, like it wanted to be on the same level as the soundtracks from the Spider-Man movies that we all already know and love. It's enough. We don't need this whole thing for what's supposed to be less of a Spider-Man centered story anyway. Even the scenes we do get with Spider-Man, where he's facing Shocker, finishing off Goblin, or mourning Gwen, to me these scenes are still more about the path that this puts Peter Parker on and how it affects him than it is about embracing those villains and Spider-Man as a hero equally. Continuing to be Spider-Man and honoring what it means to be that hero everyone needs is, for the most part, the message in the end. So I found myself quite satisfied with the soundtrack given the story that it was made for, and upon rewatching, I've actually come to appreciate it quite a bit, so much that I think I'll be listening to it for months to come. Before I move on to the final thoughts for this review, I want to go over a couple criticisms for the movie. I'm only going to cover the two big ones that I wrote down. I did notice a few smaller ones, but I'm not going to dwell on them. I'll leave that to the trolls in the premiere chat who complained the whole time. Firstly, the segment with Spidey and Tim went on for too long. They jump between that and other segments, such as the final one, with just Mary Jane and Harry, but every time they switch back, me, along with some of the others watching during the premiere, eventually began to notice that it felt like he was at the kid's house for a long time. I wonder if there was a way they could have split that segment in half, perhaps by having Spidey leave and come back to resolve the reservations he created between he and Tim. That would have been better than one long segment where he's been at some kid's house for several hours, going through everything all at once. To their credit, they did give it a bit of an intermission by having a scene in between where Spidey is just talking to Tim's mom, but he still basically spent the better half of the movie's following action there in that house. My second and biggest peeve about the movie is that this Spider-Man iteration has too much pre-establishment. Establishment is a great thing, and I actually think it's what can make a Spider-Man universe good. You might even hear me elaborate on that in a future video, but I think in this case they took it too far. Apparently, a lot of this Spider-Man story has already been told, which takes away from how much story there is left to be told. One of the beautiful things that remains about every Spider-Man we know is that these stories aren't exactly at closing points. Spider-Man in the MCU just opened up a new beginning after No Way Home. The Amazing Spider-Man films were cut short, and a lot of us are dying to see a third installment to this day. And the Raimi films ended in a place of closure, but in that scenario, we were also cut short because the fourth movie was canceled, and Tobey Maguire's return in No Way Home showed us all how much we really miss him, and had us very curious about what he had been up to since then. But in the case of this one, he's already fought a plethora of villains, and has had as much happen to him as the Spectacular Spider-Man, much more even. Now, this story does take inspiration from Spider-Man Blue and The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, along with several other different series. And I would imagine that if you want to tell a Spider-Man story where he's already at a point of being subject to losing someone as precious as to the character as Gwen, then he is going to need that bit of background so that this isn't something that he's only just now experiencing as a fresh new Spider-Man, because that would be in very bad taste for Peter wanting to be Spider-Man if he were to experience something like that so early on. However, when we listen to him as he tells Tim his origin story, he says that he only became Spider-Man 5 years ago. I don't know if 5 years of being Spider-Man is enough for him to have experienced everything that they said he did. Tom Holland's Spider-Man was in action from 2016 to 2018, got dusted, then picked up where he left off from 2023 to 2024. So that's 5 calendar years of action right there. And then Tobey Maguire's was in action from 2002 to 2007, which is about the same amount of time. But it's being conveyed that this version of Spider-Man has twice, if not 3 times, more experience than those two. In fact, he has a lot of the things that Peter B. Parker from the Spider-Verse movies has. But that version of Peter is a fully formed adult and has reached a point where he's ready to propose to Mary Jane by the end of that movie. So I'm sure he's been Spider-Man for much longer than 5 years. In fact, many sources say that he's been Spider-Man for a little over 20 years. So imagine Spider-Man Lotus having experience that competes with that at 5 years. I feel like they could have toned it down a notch with the amount of villains he's faced, the in-universe merchandising of the character, and all the documented history. That's pretty much it. As I was mentioning, I got everything I want out of this, as well as everything I could ask for. There was just enough of everything. Peter Parker, Spider-Man, Harry, MJ, character development for each of them, action, emotion, everything. I mean it. One thing I did want more of, though, was Spider-Man Lotus. Obviously, none of us should jump the gun and expect too much from a fan film, but now that I know what the storytelling is like and how they use the characters, I would actually love to see them use certain elements left in the film to continue the story and actually tell it in a more typical Spider-Man story style, with the hopes that they can get a higher budget to execute it. I know this isn't the Spider-Man movie that a lot of us signed up for, but I think it's also the kind of Spider-Man movie that we need every once in a while. At the same time, I feel like Sony and Marvel wouldn't be bothered with something like this. This is the kind of thing you only read about in the comics, and Spider-Man Lotus brings it to the screen. And because of that, I think regardless of the quality or how much it competes with the big league films, that this film is a film to appreciate. You won't see anything like it very often at all, and I thank everyone involved for getting it done. I'm very thankful this movie made it past the finish line so that we can all enjoy it. And on that note, thank you all for watching. Please leave a like, consider subscribing, and leave a comment so we can continue this discussion. I want to hear from all of you about my thoughts and your own. And until next time, goodbye.